Now, some countries will certainly introduce or have already introduced the digital tax, but now everybody is waiting whether the OECD process will lead to a harmonized global tax. But if not, I'm pretty sure that the European countries will go ahead. And indeed, the resistance of Ireland and some other countries, I think that somehow should be circumvented, and I expect that a European agreement will be agreed, because clearly digital companies were the beneficiaries of this health crisis. Their profits are going up. So indeed, it's even more urgent to tax those big companies now.
The response from the United States this week not to be involved in those OECD talks and to try and push it out until later this year before there's a proper discussion or any progress made gives the impression that this is a huge negative for Europe, and that if they want to make any progress, it could be individual trade fights or it could be trade tariffs that many of European nations would face at this point. But I just want to bring in what happened with the European data protection laws, because there was this collective action, and in the United States, some of the Silicon Valley tech groups said, well, we'd rather have one regulation to deal with than splintered regulation. And what they're now looking at in Europe is splintered regulation around a digital tax, various different levels of percentages around digital taxes. Is there any leverage in the fact that Europe might come up with one solution, even if it is slightly punitive for those Silicon Valley companies?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the urgency that the current situation is posing to all economies in the European Union, they will come up with one solution, and the resistance from different quarters of the EU will be somehow managed. And I'm also pretty sure that the US will fight back to some extent. But it also a little bit depends on the EU-US debate on how the US elections will go on, whether Mr. Trump will continue to be the next president or perhaps Mr. Biden will take a new role. If Mr. Biden will be the new president, I could expect that he would more return to international cooperation and could help the OECD process to find a global solution for taxing digital companies.
Zsolt, I want to get back to this tax debate that Jeff was asking you about as well, because I find this absolutely fascinating. Historically, if we're going back the last 15, 20 years, many of us have thought if the EU fractures, it'll fracture from the south upwards because of the various strains on countries such as Greece, on countries such as Italy. But for more about what I read and what I hear from you as well, I think actually it could fracture from the north downwards as well, because some of the methodology we're talking about solving the fiscal and budgetary problems mean a further transfer of wealth from the north to the south. Many voters will just not buy that. They won't vote in governments going forward, not just in the frugal four, but across the northern states in the EU as well. Surely that is the greatest concern now, that actually people who allow this transfer of wealth just might not get voted back in again.
Indeed, the Commission proposal for this recovery facility involves an enormous redistribution from the north to the south, and a number of countries in the north complained that the goal of this fund should be to help the recovery from the current economic shock caused by the pandemic, and not solving long-standing problems like fiscal sustainability in southern countries or helping the convergence of Eastern European countries, which are anyway doing relatively well and were hit much less by the current crisis than, let's say, Italy or Spain. So indeed, I think a lot of discussion today and in the coming months will be how to square the circle, namely whether EU money would be enough or at least would make a big push for the fiscal sustainability of Italy and some other Southern European countries, or instead the European effort should focus on clearly just the recovery part from the current economic shock, and more long-standing issues should be left to the standard European Union budget, because we shouldn't forget that beyond this 750 billion euro proposal for the pandemic fund, the European Commission proposed an even larger fund, 1.1 trillion euros, for the usual 7-year EU budget, so that includes even more money. And if that money is used better, that can also help a lot in addressing the long-standing structural issues in the European Union.